Hi everyone, welcome back. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and give this video a like. You'll get content updates on things related to geeky discussions, mental health, archetypes, and support for sensitive individuals. I am back with my colleague, Dr. Elizabeth from Psychology for Geeks, and we're going to have a fun discussion on the topic of ADHD. I'm not really sure where we're going to take this, but in general, I just do want to ask about why would a diagnosis of ADHD be important? What does it actually look like? And what are your thoughts on supporting ADHD and what it is?
You know, lately I've been eh, thinking a lot about how I gave a presentation about neurodiversity the other day at one of my local libraries, and I was talking about what is included in that. And then later I had a client ask me, what if it's not ADHD or what if it is ADHD? And then I ended up saying, hey, I don't think it really matters what it is. And here's why. Because in therapy, we're going to design or we're going to try to figure out what is best for you. What kind of lifestyle, what kind of communication, what kind of, social ability is right for you. So, and the what doesn't really matter is the diagnosis, whether it's like the exact one or not. We are addressing the root of the problem, right? So for when it comes to ADHD, particularly a lot of it is, being bored or not being able to pay attention or forgetting things, right? So if we design something that works for them, then again, the diagnosis doesn't really matter because that's what works for them. And then they're able to sort of like move on with their life. However, there are times where it makes us feel good to know that it was ADHD or it was autism or social anxiety. It wasn't that there was something inherently wrong with us.
Hmm.
Right. So in those situations, it can be really, really helpful to have a flat answer saying, hey, neurodiversity, specifically autism or ADHD. And then it's like, oh, so you mean it wasn't like I wasn't trying hard enough or I wasn't dumb or I wasn't all of these things that often we hear, growing up in school from like our own families because we just our brain functions differently and the way that we motivate ourselves it's different than other people. So the usual motivations at school don't really necessarily work for us, and if they just so happen to work for us because we're doing well in school, then we don't get diagnosed. Nobody ever
Mhm.
sees how much we are struggling until eventually we become an adult, right?
Yes. Yes.
So having like a specific diagnosis, it helps us understand that it's just the way our brain works, but it's not necessarily that we are a failure as a human being, right?
Hmm. Oh gosh, now I want to go down a rabbit hole a little bit because
Mhm.
I've been thinking about this thing about mental health diagnoses and how it's actually incorrect because instead of diagnosing autism and ADHD as a mental health diagnosis, it's not a mental health diagnosis, it's a brain difference, which is not the same as depression or trauma or things related to emotional dysregulation. So the end
Mhm.
product is emotional dysregulation because of the neurotype difference. And so I'm curious, like, do all therapists are they equipped to deal with neurotypes that are not necessarily emotion based? It's not, right?
No, I think I saw someone actually. Wait, someone I've been trying to do a collab with for a while, and they live in Australia, so sometimes we kind of miss each other. But anyway, they have a bunch of really great posts in their socials all the time, and one of the things that they shared was like, "Hey, listen, this is one way to know whether the person that." The mental health provider that you're talking to or considering, getting services from is actually neurodivergent positive or not,
Mm.
and ask them what neurodiversity means to you. And because the therapists that are when we are very passionate about it, we go on like a long explanation of what it is, and that's how you know that we actually take it seriously, right? And with things for like ADHD or autism, sometimes even though you know them intellectually, it's really kind of difficult for you to fully understand the other person's perspective or to empathize what it's like unless you also have it.
Mm,
Or like,
yeah.
so a loved one, also experiences the same thing. But we're also human, so as therapists we have sort of like our own or we have our own biases, we have our own areas of expertise or areas of interest, I should say. And so it depends. But if you are specifically looking for therapy when it comes to addressing symptoms of, like, social anxiety, or Tourette's or OCD, whatever it is that falls into sort of like the neurodivergent category, I will highly, highly recommend you asking them, like, how do you treat someone like this?
Mm,
Because the more I spend time sort of like as a professional, I feel like doing therapy, I realized that the way that I do therapy completely different than other people. And I flat out tell my clients on the first session that I have with them, I usually say things like that. Listen, I don't have a specific way where I do things. I do a little bit of everything. And it kind of, but I can't do like step one, step two, step three, because my brain just cannot function like that. If that's what you're looking for, not a problem. Let me
mm.
know and I can find you someone that does that. But I
I love
cannot.
that. Thank you for doing that. We're also part of my work is advocating for clients and
Mm-hmm.
consumers. Totally important to ask these questions so you get a feel if the service is a good fit. That's totally important. Yes.
Hmm. Yeah, and because if it's not only am I going to be struggling trying to figure out how to help you, but you are going to hate every single session you have with me because we're
Ugh.
just not compatible, right? Or
Mm.
like I'm just going to talk too much and annoy you, right? And that's not going to be helpful for either of us. So that I flat out say, I'm like, hey, I know sometimes it's very shy, or like people are very shy and like I don't really know you and I don't want to tell you to your face, hey, you're weird and I don't want to work with you, right? But I'm like, here's my email. Send me an email or call the main office and tell them you want someone else. I, I I'm not gonna get hurt. If anything, I really appreciate that you're doing that, because
Mm.
then that way, not only are they advocating for themselves, but they're more likely to get someone that they are compatible with and that they can
Yes.
work really well with. Yeah.
Yes. And because therapy is such an obscure practice,
Mm,
nobody freaking knows what it is unless you're in it yourself. And still, there's all these nuances depending on your theory of orientation, your
mhm, mhm,
personality, how many therapists you've gone to as yourself or helped as a therapist. Like, it's so obscure. It's like, what the heck is this? There is no real clear 1, 2, 3 step of what therapy
mhm,
actually looks like. And so when you give that permission to a client, now we're making it transparent. And that's so awesome that you do that because I have had a history. I've gone to therapy myself with multiple different therapists,
mhm,
and they've never told me what the field was like. So this is funny because when I was non in the space of psychology,
mhm,
they would never tell me what expectations were, what to walk me through, like my rights, my ability to self-advocate. But
mhm.
after I was in the field learning and stuff like that, they're like, "Oh, you're just doing it for experience. Like, I'm not really actually going to help you because you probably have insight." I'm like, "This is not helping at all." So like, it's a mixed bag. Sometimes we get good cookies and tasty things. Sometimes we get like, "What the fuck was that?" You know, like.
Yeah. and and again, like sometimes people come to session and then they ask like, so did you do CBT, or like did you do like a specific kind of thing?
Yeah.
And then I'm like, yes and no.
Oh, okay.
I'm like, and I don't do like just like pure CPT, because there's a lot of other elements that are helpful that are
Mm.
not included in CBT. And the other day I was like I heard somebody came in and then they're like, "Oh, I really want to work on internal family systems." Like that's the type of therapy. And I'm like, "Oh, I don't think I know that one." And then I did a little bit of research and I was like, "Oh, that's what I do." I just don't call it that. I just call
That's
it
funny.
therapy.
That's funny.
Because okay, a lot of like therapists or therapy in general, they try to, like especially like the newer ones, they try to get more at the core of the problem, right? And then they just do it in a slightly different way,
Hmm.
right? For internal family systems, there is a lot of like, symbolism, and like, if your dad is this chair and your mom is that desk over there or whatever. Like, so you can visually see things. I do something similar. I just don't use the exact things. I modify it in a way because I mean, a lot of what I do is virtual, is through telehealth. So I don't have the ability to say like, so picture this butterfly as your dad and picture like that's not gonna really work, right? But yes, so the way that I do therapy is that I try to figure out what's the root of the problem. What's the thing from way back in the day that sort of like started this whole thing, right? Sometimes people don't want to do that, and
Mm,
that's okay. I'm just gonna wait until, they're ready to discuss. That's why I always ask like, "Yo, what do you want to talk about today?"
mm,
I don't necessarily have an agenda. If the person doesn't know what they want, I'm like, okay, I'll throw out suggestions and then we can go from there. But I don't dictate what the session is gonna be like or what we're gonna discuss. And that makes therapy so difficult, almost in a way to keep track of, because sometimes I have clients that are like, okay, we're addressing things that happen in childhood, we're making good progress. And then the following week, they have just a huge dumpster fire of an accident that happened and they just need to process that,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then so this is why it gets so tricky, like trying to communicate like certain things about mental health to insurance companies, because we're like, it's not like a broken leg where we
Mm,
can see it, right? Like sometimes we make a lot of progress and then we go right back to the beginning, right? And then so it's just it's so sort of messy, and a lot of people don't really like that. A lot of people are kind of like, I'm here so you can fix me, and I'm like, oh, I mean, if you figure out how to do it, please let me know, and we'll both be rich. But like, there isn't like a way, And so when it comes to neurodiversity, there's a lot of. Initially, I spent, I don't know, the majority of my time just saying, so, like, that's not a big deal. Like, that's normal. Okay, yeah, I do that too. Sort of like normalizing things for them because they have had to live a lot of their life sort of behind this mask of pretending to be someone they're not. And now they're exhausted. And I'm like, yeah, you would be exhausted. You're like putting on a show 24/7
mm,
for the past 30 years. Why wouldn't you be exhausted? And then so it's a lot of like, hey, just kind of put the mask aside, let's work. Sometimes I get a lot of apologies of like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not even like looking at your eyes or whatever. And I'm like, I don't care, I'm not looking at your eyes either. It's like it doesn't matter. Or they're like fidgeting and looking around, and I'm like, if that whatever makes you feel comfortable, like, yeah, whatever,
mm,
it doesn't matter, right? And a lot of people are like, oh, sorry, I interrupted you, and I was like, listen, all of my friends are also neurodivergent. We can't keep we can't stay on track on a conversation. We are like 20 different topics at the same time. Everybody's interrupting each other. And I'm just so used to it and it's so normal for me. But I understand that for other people, that is so weird. Like
mm,
something they have never experienced in their life, or something that they have been looking to, or like to have in their life, like somebody who just didn't really care, that every now and then you just blurt things out,
mhm.
like on accident or without meaning to. And yeah, there is a lot of information online about neurodivergent disorders, I guess, or whatever they're called, diagnoses. Because a lot of people will go on TikTok and say, hey, so I'm autistic and ADHD, and I tend to have this one specific thing that I do, and that means, so if you also do it, that
Oh,
means
yeah,
you
yeah,
are
yeah.
autistic and ADHD. And I'm like, yes and no. Like, it's not universal for everyone. It's a
Yeah.
little bit different. It could be a misdiagnosis sometimes, but I kind of have like a kind of love-hate relationship with like TikTok in general, because it actually in my own personal life it's been really helpful. My brother came up to me and was like a few years ago, and he said like, I think I have ADHD, and I'm like, you think? And I'm like, yeah, I know. And then
Mm,
he said like, we processed, we talked about it, and then he said like, yeah, I think it's ADHD, and I'm like, yeah, I know, I know. And then he said like, I think you also have ADHD. And I'm like, no, I don't. I was like, I have anxiety, excuse you, And then he went through this phase for like a few months. Like he would just see me walking around the house doing something or whatever. And then I would be like, oh, I forgot what I come into this room for. Or like, trip over my words or something. And then he'd be like, ADHD. ADHD. And then he just like got into my brain. And then I was like, you know what? Forget this. And I opened up the DSM and I was like, we're going one by one. And then I was like, oh my God, my whole life is explained. Because a lot of the time I was just making excuses. Oh, it's just because I'm not smart enough, or like because I'm anxious, or because English is not my first language. Like I get, all of these things. I always just thought there was something that I just wasn't good enough for, and that explained all the symptoms, right? And then I went to a psychiatrist because I'm like, listen, as much as self-diagnosis can lead us in the right path, it can also be kind of harmful. And
Mm.
I didn't want to just start saying, hey, I'm also ADHD without sort of like verifying. So then I went to a psychiatrist and they said anxiety for sure. And I was like, no, duh. We agree. Give me meds. They did. And once my anxiety reduced, all of the ADHD symptoms came out to play. And I was like, listen, I want to address the root of the problem. Like, just putting band aids on top of the symptoms that we see the most often is not helping.
Mhm.
And then he said, like, well, it's kind of difficult to distinguish between like anxiety and ADHD and like all these things. So then I got a referral to someone else to get a second opinion. And then we both agree, yeah, very likely ADHD. I started um because at the time my brother was like completely comfortable with, like him identifying as a ADHD uh owner of a brain. Wait, that made no sense. Oh my gosh. So that's how you know I have ADHD. Um And so then we started talking like, what is the best way of communicating for us? What is the best way of making sure that we're keeping the house clean, making
Mm.
sure that we're drinking water, making sure that we are, doing the tasks that we need to do self-care or to, keep our jobs, things like that. And then so little by little, we started sort of like trying to test out like things here and there. And now it's like whenever I can't focus, I'm like, hey, come over here. I need someone to body double me or like, um or whenever we just don't feel like socializing with other people, we're like, hey, I have no energy to socialize right now.
Mm.
And then the
Mm.
other person's like, oh, totally understand. I'm just gonna go away now then. See you later. Or
Mhm.
come find me when you're feeling better, And so for the both of us, we sort of like created this really safe space for us to talk about these things um and to I tell him all the time, like he's my guinea pig. Now that
Mhm.
I'm going to therapy, and then I realize something about myself that I want to improve, and I'm like, hey, listen, I want to improve the way that I do this thing. So be prepared for me to be asking you consistently to give me hugs, or whenever I'm feeling sad, or for me to randomly come up to you and be like, hey, I'm anxious for no
Mm.
reason, and he did this thing. He would do this thing where I would be like, "Hey, David, I'm anxious," and then he would just take on this really sarcastic persona, and then he'd just be like, "Well, have you thought not being anxious?" And every single time he said it, it made me giggle, and then it made me feel better. So then I was like, I don't like it when people do that, but you just do it funny, so
Mhm.
it's acceptable, right? But I kind of totally forgot what your question was. But
I'm
one thing
gonna okay.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. One thing that I think
Good. Still
it's
going.
important important for us to understand is that regardless of whether it's ADHD or another diagnosis that is sort of part of the neurodivergent family, one thing that is very, very important is to have a supportive community around you.
Mhm.
If you don't have that, everything just seems so hard.
Mhm.
And it's really going to impact any sort of progress that you're trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah. So I'm gonna go backwards. You're
Yes.
ranting. Okay, so uh, going back. So it was neat to hear that you're going through this like differential diagnosis experience, trying to figure out what exactly it is. You're doing
Mhm,
due diligence for yourself, not to just like claim some things, like maybe, kind of, sort of, but as a
mhm,
professional, you like have this integrity, right? It's like, well,
mhm,
you know what? I'm gonna walk the walk. I'm gonna try and get diagnosis for myself. And I know that's not doesn't have to be the case for every professional, but for you is important for you, right?
mhm,
But when you're doing that though, so one important thing, couple important things. So I'm going to list a couple. One of them is the important part about the anxiety or depression that masks the symptoms of the neurodivergence
mhm,
because the neurotype is existing first. When you're in
mhm,
a world that doesn't cater to your neurotype or your nervous system, all of a sudden the response will be anxiety, stress, depression, some type of grief process, right? Because you're
mhm,
constantly feeling like, what am I doing wrong? You're constantly hypervigilant, right? Or sad that things weren't offered for you in a certain way. And so I love that. So I want people to kind of like put that into your brain, bring that up to your therapist in conversation. If you have multiple conditions coexisting and you are also neurodivergent, that's probably the framework that your therapist will help you do too. So it helps you feel like, is my therapist competent in the field of helping with neurodiversity stuff? Because it's a layer. The cake on top of the neurodiversity is the mental health part. Neurodiversity is not mental health, right? And so it's weaved into it. So like that's
mhm,
super important. I want just to emphasize because a lot of people think, well, my neurodiversity is a thing I need to fix. Like, no, it's not. The mental health part is a thing that you can work on. Then you can learn to self-advocate and navigate the world as your neurodivergent self. There's a lot of
mhm.
these neurodivergent parts, like it's your brain. You can't always fix it, unless we're ultra wealthy and anyways, like that's not the option. So, like when you talked about that and then you gave people the option to self-advocate and say, hey, is this the right fit or not? Um, Maybe not, or this is my approach. And then you kind of go into giving people permission to email you and say, like, you know what, not a good
Mhm,
fit. Like these are so healing for neurodivergent people who have felt like their voices or never heard, or they're being told to mask, 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 and then, but now you're shifting the paradigm. You're doing like little things, even if they weren't your client, and you just had a consult with them. You're doing so much potential healing with someone who's never had that option to heal,
mhm.
and that's amazing. So it's also really neat to hear that you and your brother have such a good relationship when it comes to proactively seeking self-development, growth, healing, empowerment. I think that sometimes when neurodivergent people are in these TikTok spaces, making content on social media, like I do archetype work, we have a stronger relationship with our victimhood, our victim archetype. And so when you're at this place of like growth and empowerment, there's a lot of people who might feel like, I don't believe that I am capable of advocating for myself. The system and the world is so bad and wrong and rejecting and sad that I don't believe that it's possible to believe that a therapist or some psychiatrist is going to diagnose me correctly. Everything's wrong. It's so bad. It's so terrible. I don't know what to do. And so, like, I want to have hope, but I don't right now. And so, how would you respond to someone who's like in that place when they're struggling with their neurodivergence and other conditions?
Well, the other thing that to add to what you were saying is that sometimes there is this misunderstanding as to like, well, if I go to my psychiatrist and I get medications for ADHD, that's gonna remove all of the symptoms.
Right.
And I'm like, no, that's not that'd be great. That'd be
Hmm.
so great if it could do that, but it doesn't. So
Hmm.
we kind of have to understand. And like you were saying, it's just okay. So the way that I work is I find the root of the problem, right? A lot of the times, like you said, the root of the problem is the neurodivergency. Like we were just born this way and the world wasn't made for us. So we have to figure out a way on how to design our home or our workspace in a way that works for us. It might be a little bit weird for other people, but hey, if it works for us, it doesn't really matter,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
then once you start becoming more comfortable with like, as soon as I started saying things like, hey, my ADHD brain totally checked out right now. Can you repeat what you're saying? I was no longer as anxious about making a mistake.
Love
You
it.
know, in
Love it.
social settings, because I was like, it's just gonna happen. That's sort of the reality of how my brain works. So I'm not gonna sort of like live my life in fear of other people judging me, especially when it came to friends. I just, you know how you have sort of like acquaintances that are or more like good friends where, but you don't really necessarily talk about all your traumas.
Yeah, yeah.
Those I was kind of like, I don't know if I should bring it up. And then I
Mm,
just kind of like, I was like, you know what, forget it. I'm just gonna start saying it. And then it made a lot of people be like, oh yeah, me too. Or like, they're like, hey, can I ask you about these symptoms? Like, I also experienced some of this, but I don't know if it's ADHD. So it brings up sort of like I guess in a way I'm creating a space where people can start talking about these things
mhm,
because I'm normalizing and I'm saying, hey, I'm talking about it. If you want to talk about it, I'm here to listen.
mm,
Right. And I know that for me it was so helpful to have my brother along in this journey. Otherwise, I think it would have been a lot more difficult for me because there are times where we are hanging out and I'm like, David, focus. I need advice on this like thing for my nonprofit. And then like sometimes I'm like, okay, I'll give him some time to think. And then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, wait, did you zone out or are you focusing? And he's like, I forgot what you're talking. And then I'm like, me
ooh.
too. So like we're just but again, like just the fact that we both accept each other and ourselves has made our lives so much worthwhile. And I used to get very impatient with him sometimes um w- when I had to repeat myself again for him.
Mhm, mhm,
And once I started realizing, hey, not only do I also do that, but now I understand why he does it, then I don't even get upset anymore. It doesn't hurt me when he doesn't pay attention, right?
mm,
And then that's what happens. So once if you have a loved one who is neurodivergent in some way, and you start further understanding the symptoms or how their brain works, then it's no longer an issue. You automatically you have a better relationship with them now because now you're not getting upset or yelling at them for doing what is so normal for them to do.
mhm,
And then you become more of a um also like an advocate. Hey, we're going to a place that is going to be really loud. Did you need something
mhm.
for like sensory? Like, are you okay with environments like that,
Yes.
right? And then not only are you understanding them and validating their experience, but you're also preparing to
Mhm,
prevent any potential
yes.
miscommunications or you know um adult tantrums happening because of sensory needs or whatever
Mhm. I really appreciate that because like it really is a buddy system type of thing. And so
Mhm,
I always advocate for community online if we can't
mhm,
find that in-person support. It's like it's really the heroic part of us, the hero's journey. You can't do the fight. I mean, someone else can't do the fight for you. You have to take the journey. You have to do your own, battle your own monsters. No one else is going to do it for you. So like if you're going to venture and live in this world, sometimes the rules are not made for us, and that's really sucky. And so what are you gonna do? Like that's the reality of like you gotta swallow this reality of like I can't be a victim forever. It does suck. At the same time, maybe I can be part of this world where things can change. Maybe I can do something where I just take up more space and speak about my experiences. So, like you said, normalizing it,
mhm,
people won't irk a little bit at the
mhm,
things. Like, so I this parallel to mine where I've been talking about like my chronic fatigue and pain for years, but I've always felt embarrassed or ashamed, right? But something clicked, so I'm going to attribute it to your relationship with me and also my boyfriend's. Like having your support and just validation for who I am has really helped me not feel ashamed of being tired and not doing the things I wish I could do. Because like the shame is a terrible invisible
mhm,
burden that we give ourselves. It's a terrible monster that we're fighting all the time. And it really does make the biggest difference in the world to be around people who don't judge you. It's like, like when you're just like, okay, Boone, answer when you can, then it's just you and Hope are just like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm too tired. I can't respond to the wall of text, but like, I know I will look at it later, like you're just
mhm,
accepting me. And that helps so much because there's no pressure to continually the mask and show up for what? Like, I will answer that or I will learn more about you. Like it
mhm.
will be there. It's like there's no rush, but people push and demand from other people when it's like not on the right terms. And it just builds resentment and really an ability to be yourself. And it just feels terrible.
um I was talking to my siblings one day. One of them has a partner, and I was saying, and they were arguing about something, and I said, hey, what's the problem here? 'Cause they were kind of getting loud. And they were like, whoa, this happened. And then I was like, okay, so what do you want from the other? And then they're like, well, this thing. And I was like, well, that's never going to happen. And then they were like, what? And I was like, listen, he has ADHD. He's never going to be normal. You have anxiety, never going to be normal. Like, you all need to deal with it. Like, that's just how it is, you know? Like, because we have these expectations of other people of like, why can't you just be normal? Why
Mm.
can't you just be like anybody else? And I'm like, what's so good about being normal? Like, I don't even know what normal means, right? But we're like, well, you just, why can't you act and behave the way that I want you to?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, who's this benefiting, the other person or you?
Hmm.
You know, so something that I tell parents too is like, parenting is so hard because each child is has a different personality, different way that they respond to parenting, and needs a different type of parent to
Mm.
be there for them, right? So maybe one benefits more from having strict boundaries and saying, no, you're not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And then the other one benefits more from just having more, in-depth conversation as to these are the potential consequences. That's why you need to listen to us,
Mm.
kind of thing. So the same way, it's the same way. Like when you are at work, when you are at school, or out in the community, if you see someone who is this is we see it a lot more often in kiddos who are throwing a tantrum, or they're jumping up and down, or they're flapping their hands or whatever, and then everyone's like, oh my gosh, parents are horrible, nobody's paying attention to the
Mm.
kid. And then I'm like, no, just the kid needs to self-regulate, and that's kind of how they do it. It's not really up to the parents, whether to be they could be the greatest parent in the world, the kid is still going to need to do the same
Hmm.
thing,
Yeah.
right? And it just so happens to be in public, and for some reason that's not socially acceptable. I want to start this parent support group for parents who are or who have a child or a loved one who is sort of like neurodivergent. And I was talking to two parents, and one of them had a kiddo who was recently diagnosed as autistic. And kiddo must have been like 5 or something. He was very shy, but ADHD. I kept looking at him because he was moving, so I was like, "Oh, what's that over there?" And at one point, he started just jumping up and down, and then I turned around and I was like, "Yeah!" And I was gonna encourage him to, like, if that's what he needed to do, he could. But as soon as I turned around, he immediately stopped and went to his mom, and I was like, "I wonder how many times he's been told stop that."
That's
And I'm
so
like, but
sad.
yeah. And then so I was telling them, I was like, did you just see that? And I'm like, they're kids. And the one thing that we always say, oh, they're young, they're not gonna understand. No, they understand.
Hmm.
Kids understand what's happening around them, and they feel it. And
Yeah.
they feel bad when people tell them, why are you so weird? Why are you doing this thing? Right. And then sometimes even providers don't really understand.
Mm-mm.
They don't have, the training that's needed. A lot of the times parents primarily go to a physician to tell them, hey, something, my child is not doing what he's supposed to, or whatever, not reaching the milestones. And then if the provider's not aware about autism or ADHD, or whatever else it may be, there might be a huge disservice that's done there to the child. A lot of resources that they could have potentially had or
Hmm.
being provided with sort of like just never happened. And then kid grows up to be super depressed and anxious, and then people wonder why. And I'm like, wait, nobody paid attention to them, or everybody was like, stop acting weird.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's just so invalidating. And that's why I love the part that I do love about TikTok is when people share their experiences and be like, hey, this is just what happened to me.
Hmm.
I don't necessarily like it when they make generalizations of everyone
Yeah.
with ADHD does this thing. I don't
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. Gosh, you have such a wealth of information. I love that you share stories to make it more relatable and illustrating it because it helps me too.
Oh, that's the only way I can communicate. I was telling my brother, 'cause I was talking to a client about this, and I was talking about them. I think I asked, "Oh, what's your communication style? Like, did you know?" And they were like, "No," and I was like, "No worries, it's not something we like think about consistently, you know." And I was like, "But one thing that I realized is that for me, it's a lot easier to tell you a story, or
Mm.
to say, hey, do you remember that one movie?" or like, have you seen this movie? That's what I'm talking about, right?
Mm.
Like this one scene, because I just run out of words to say it. So if I can give you an example, it's just a lot better for me to be, clear. And if I hope it works, it
No.
helps people.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's you use what you do best, and that's when it works, right?
Yeah. Actually, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What do you think about those social media posts that say, "Oh, if you autism is a superpower or ADHD is a
I hate it.
superpower"? Why?
Oh, are you interviewing me
Yes, yes.
now?
Flipping the tables on you now.
The turn deaf tables. Okay, so I don't like it because it dismisses possible disability, which it really is. A lot of it is disabling. Um, the more I read and learn about the inflamed brain sensitivity traits and its relation to all these diagnoses underneath, like the physical stuff that happens when you're autistic and other things, and the high correlation. So there's a lot of epileptic people who are also autistic.
Mm,
Who wants to be having seizures all the time? Not epileptic people, not people with seizures. Is like, it sucks. Your brain is like burnt up, like electricity wise. Like you have to start all over, regroup. Your body is like, and it's embarrassing when you fall and all these things happen. But there's these things that we're dismissing. So it's that toxic positivity bypassing in a very unhealthy way that this pain and the darkness that you're experiencing, you don't have a right to feel it. Like,
mhm,
so who cares if you are autistic or neurodivergent? Especially with media, we're going to do the savant. We're going to do the genius who seems to be quirky and relatable and kind of cute, right? And so
mhm,
that's our picture of an autistic person, the savant who is still lovable because they just sometimes say off brand things, but they're genius and they help the organization in some way. So that's what we're going to look for, and that's when you know that you're the acceptable form of autistic in society, which I really hate. And that's the superpower that they're trying to equate to. It's like people who try to align with somebody in social media who does not even speak for you, but because of one trait that is similar to you, you're gonna, politics wise, you're gonna vote for them. You're gonna vote for the wolf that's gonna destroy the sheep flock, right? Like,
mhm,
or that another scenario is like there's an axe and all these trees are like, he's made of wood, we're gonna vote for the axe. Like the axe is
mhm,
gonna cut everybody down anyway. So like it's kind of like that where you're harming your community and yourself by saying things like that. It's not a good thing. I'm usually very vague and subjective about the things, and I say the thing I say a lot is like it's not good or bad. I'm gonna say this is bad, shameful. Don't do it. It comes from a good place because I get it. So let's go backwards. Let's say you grew up with all these disabling things. Like I was joking about, I fell down a mountain when I was a kid. I hit my head on a boulder because my proprioception is not great. Like all my internal systems are fucked up. And so I'm afraid to go out because I get hurt a lot. And people have reinterpreted that as like, she's not sociable, she's uppity, she's elitist, she doesn't like people, she's too good. And I hate that I've had to defend myself. Like, I actually don't want to go out because I'm afraid of falling. And
mhm,
people really believe that because, like, I look able bodied, I look healthy. I'm crying because it's been so hard to explain it because people have told me, like, you don't look, you're fine. You're just making stuff up. You just don't want, you just tell us you don't like us. So, like, that's not the case. I'm trying to tell you that there's these things going on inside. I trip a lot, like, that's my
mhm,
history. And anyways, so, like, because of that, I get that because of this history of rejection and disability and pain and hardship, that you'd want to see it as a superpower. You'd want to reclaim the thing that has destroyed your life forever. And so it makes sense, right?
mhm,
So I get it, but also you need to grieve. You need to show that it is painful and you need to be vulnerable, or else you're lying to yourself. And that's the thing. My work is about, are we lying to ourselves or are we being truthful? And it's okay to be weak in certain ways and aspects. Like it doesn't mean you're weak as a person as a whole. It's like physically you're weak. Physically you're unable to endure for certain things. You're chronically fatigued. That's not you as a weak person. That's just your body at a limit. It's you not getting the medical care that you need, and that's systemic. And so once you're able to accept that, you realize it is not a superpower. It's things we can learn to live with and manage. And that's when you can empower yourself. But before that, you're bypassing all this stuff that's underneath the iceberg where you're going to burn out later on in life. And I wouldn't want people who are neurodivergent to finally embrace that, you know what? Yeah, I've had to mask forever. I'm 50 years old, I'm 60 years old, and now I'm gonna, okay, you're right. It was disabling for a long time, and now I'm ready to embrace it. And that's what a lot of people do when they're older adults. I have compassion for that process, but like please stop with the superpower. It's like it's rhetoric and it's damaging and it makes people not realize that there's so much going on where you can learn to embrace yourself and become stronger. Like it's not a bad thing to realize that you're a vulnerable person or can potentially be disabled because of like all this stuff going on inside your nervous system. That's what we don't know with like pairing mental health, neurodivergence, and medical science. We really do need to combine these all together better so people can, when they do share on TikTok and social media, I think it's important to share that stuff because then we could have a bigger picture with the visuals and the science because people keep on saying, no, autism is just a social disorder. It's like people who have quirky communication. Like, that's not it. It's actually so much stuff underneath that, yeah, a lot of disabled people become injured because of these things. It's way more than that. So that's my thing because it's very personal.
And there's also to this aspect of like, well, so and so is also autistic. Why can't you just be like so and so? And I'm like, because it's not the same for
Yeah.
everyone. Like it's not like everybody is experiencing the world in the same way just because they're all autistic or because they all have ADHD. It's like, okay, this is something that I kind of get really stressed or like very upset over when people are like, oh, but the diagnosis, like, it's just a guide. It's just a guide for
Yes.
us to try to figure out what to do. It's not a like be all end all thing. Like
Hmm.
it like we're constantly going through revisions because we just don't know exactly how the brain works. We don't have all the information as to why somebody is born autistic or why someone is
Hmm.
born, with ADHD. The only thing that we can do is try to normalize it. And in a sense, by saying that, it's a superpower, it's sort of like we swing really hard in the opposite direction, and then we're like, oh, all the things that you struggle with, nonsense,
Yeah.
it should be celebrated. And I'm
Hmm.
like, well, what if I don't have like the savant thing? Like,
Yeah.
what if my siblings and I, we not only are we siblings, and we both have ADHD, but the way that it presents for the both of us is different.
Mm.
So even within family members, it can still be different. So it's it's a lot of things that unfortunately we cannot fix right away. But the one thing that we can do is provide a space for everyone to feel comfortable being themselves without having to mask, because that makes it extra difficult. Not only are we already working with the rinky dinky bike that gets flats all the time, and sometimes you have to twist it in a specific way for it to start working or whatever, when everyone else is riding like the best brand bike, but also like it's hard when we have to pretend that our bike is also really cool and it goes
Yeah.
fast all the time and it doesn't need to be stopped every now and then to be fixed, because we just run out of energy or motivation, or just socializing just sucks, and it just happens to be part of my job,
Mm.
that I have to do, that I love, by the way, but it's just this an additional thing that I have to be concerned with. And so my brother, at one point, he was very, very upset, and he said like, "Hey, I just saw. I think he was reading through a contract. I don't know if it's from his previous job or his current one, but it said disability, and it gave a bunch of descriptions as to what disability was, and ADHD was part of that. And then he said like, so technically, do I qualify as like someone who is disabled?" And then I was like, I guess if the law says so, but again, a lot of the times it's like, yeah, but you don't look like you're
Mhm.
struggling. And I'm like, well,
Mhm.
what do you want me to do? Show up in my PJs? Or like, have you seen those like skateboards where people put a mattress on the skateboard and then they just like run around? Like, do you want me to just do that because I'm so stressed out, or like, have no energy to get up, and like that's how you want me to show up to work? Like what do you want me to like? Do you want me to like tattoo it on my
Yeah.
forehead?
Yeah.
Like it looks different for everyone. And like even with anything else, like someone who is like super depressed, we've seen it, Robin Williams, like he was an
Mhm.
incredible actor, he was so funny, but he struggled with depression as well. Like both things can coexist. We can look normal, whatever normal means, and we can also be struggling with a bunch of things.
Yeah, I think that's the part of the culture that we really need to keep on addressing. It's like if someone says they're struggling or disabled, they're like, okay, prove it. I won't treat you differently or be kind to you or offer compassion unless you legitimately prove to me that you have to, it's a game now. You have to prove to me for approval that you are disabled in my lens of definition of disabled, right? It's like
Hmm.
this game will never win. And it's like constant projection. I'm like, just say that you're upset that the system manipulated all of us to be constantly productive and work in society. Just say that. Like, you're not angry that this person is disabled. You're angry that you can't rest either. That's basically what I think about when I see people getting angry at other people for struggling. It's like, you're going to get mad at someone for struggling? It's so weird.
Well, like it's this sort of like double standard that we have in a society as a whole, because anyone that works at a hospital or hospital setting, they're like, they took an oath and they're going to do the best that they can to help people. But also for some reason, those same people that took an oath to help other people cannot be helped. They have to work like 24
Yeah.
hours without sleep. They have to
Yeah.
go and do all these things. They have to basically overwork themselves for the benefit of everyone else. And if you dare to complain,
Hmm.
how dare you
Yeah.
do that? Right. And I'm like, we're not robots. Like, we also need to, whatever. And then they're like, well, that's why you're getting paid. That's what I'm like, listen, this is just basic human need, right? Like, we're not even providing some people with that, right? Not only just like the doctors are like highly qualified or whatever, but also like anyone around us who's like neurodivergent, and then they just, you know are always seen to be dressed down because the things that they find comfortable just are, pajamas or
Mm.
like, sweats or whatever. But that's what they find comfortable. And I'm like, so then who cares? Like, they're still able to perform the job
Exactly. Yeah.
regardless.
Can you still do the
So,
job? Yes.
yeah. So then who cares? And I think it just might be my ADHD talking, and the fact that everyone around me is either autistic or ADHD, or neurodivergent in some way. But I'm like, I'm so used to it. And like, I have some friends sometimes, because I talk about my ADHD a lot. I think they feel a lot comfortable talking about it. And then they will be like, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't do this one thing. And I'm like, it's after a while, it gets really annoying when they continue to apologize. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care that you're doing all these things. I do it all the time. I understand. Chill. But
Mm.
again, it's sort of like almost like a survival mechanism that we learn, because in other social circles, they had to constantly apologize for who they are,
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're not seen as normal people. They're kind of like, there's just something wrong with you
Hmm.
because you're always late, because you're always doing this thing, right? And yeah, I'm just trying to do my part, making everybody have that, safe space. And because I feel like this is diving way too deep in a different direction. I'm gonna say it anyway. Like, growing up, I didn't really have a geeky community I could identify with, right? So I was mega geeky. I just nobody knew, or I was like just nerdy, like school smart, right? But I was also mega geeky. It wasn't until college that I started becoming more comfortable. Like, yeah, I watch anime. So what? Like, I watch this thing. I really enjoy it. I'm totally like in love with Tom Hiddleston, and I love Loki. Like, I was like, yeah, so what? Like, that's just things that happen. Or like, that's just who I am. That's part of sort of like my world. And so I didn't like growing up, I didn't feel like like there was anyone there for me. So now as an adult, and part of what I'm trying to do with Psychology for Geeks is provide that space for people. You know, like, did you need to be wearing headphones and sunglasses indoors because everything's too loud, too bright? Okay, like, can
Mhm.
you play D&D? Like, that's what matters, like, can you play D&D? Like, can you, like, hang out and, talk to me, like, do
Mm.
these fun things that's really what matters. It doesn't really matter what the person looks like or what, equipment they need or how many pills they need in order to be able to progress through life, right? Like, just I don't know. I'm just gonna go off on a rant. You should stop me now.
I mean, that's actually a really good way to close our conversation because we talked about all these important things and live experiences of why neurodiversity affirmative care is very important. But the
Mhm.
lived experience of the professional, I think it trumps so much. I'm going to say the caveat is internalized ableism, but in general, the professionals who have the lived experience, I'm going to say, I'm going to bump you to the top. You are S tier with helping the community in this in this niche. It's so important. I think that sometimes people want to take the trainings like, oh, I'm curious. I have worked with autistic people. Like you never ask for referrals in the group and they're like, I understand neurodiversity or I have a couple ADHD clients. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. I want to
Mhm.
see someone ramble and rant paragraphs upon paragraphs in the referral request, showing me that yes, this is their passion. They totally understand this
Mhm.
experience, and like this is the person that I'm going to give you the client potential referrals to. Like you're my person. So it's kind of like how we had like I don't know how long this conversation has been, but more than an hour, maybe I'm guessing. But like that's what people need. We need a space to just like bounce back and forth our thoughts like tennis and then to see where it goes. If you're like, oh, we lost the ball, it went down the hill over there, and we're gonna go that way, right? And so it's wherever the topic takes us, but it's also personal and you get to create this space in your own way. So like I'm so curious and I'm so excited for you to make the virtual and the tangible space when the time is right for you to do that because I I support your cause. I believe in your cause and I know that you're the perfect person to do this. So thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts.
Wait, wait, wait.
What?
I totally
What?
forgot. I wanted to
Oh,
mention
no.
this.
You're not done.
Okay. No. One last rant. So earlier we were talking about how important it is to have a community and have that safe space, right? So one thing that I have noticed, because my brother got me into watching VTubers and streamers in general, there's a lot of them that actively talk about their autism, their
Mm,
ADHD, and there is so validating for me to be like, hey, listen, not only do me and my brother have ADHD, but there is someone on the other side of the world who is doing the same thing, and we kind of identify, right? So if you find yourself in like this very small community that is not very understanding or supportive of you being neurodivergent, sometimes you can find that online. And it's not necessarily like someone that you actually talk to,
mhm.
but it's just someone that kind of talks at you, like a
Yeah.
streamer. And there you find, this community of like, so like, I all the streamers that I've been watching lately, they all have very amazing communities where they're very supportive, and everybody's like, oh, you have ADHD, yeah, me too, or like, oh, there's ADHD going, right? But again, everything is so normal, and this is just who we are, and it just so happens that that space or that type of work works a lot better with how their brain functions,
Mm,
right?
mhm,
And they're very sometimes some of them are very open to discussing, this is how my autistic brain works, and they have conversations with them and they answer questions about it, because that is a way for us to not only normalize but disseminate information as to what it is, how did you like to be treated, like how did you like to communicate and things like that. So again, it doesn't we can build that community of support and encouragement and validation. If we don't have it right now, it is possible for us to build it.
mhm. It totally is. And I love that you're obsessed with VTubers. That's great. Mine is Fortnite and Elden Ring streamers. So like um the thing that is kind of neat with that is because when people stream, they're empowering themselves to find the avenues to communicate and speak truly who they are, right? It's like
Mhm, mhm.
because what happens, right? Like way in the beginning, we talked about how the anxiety or the depression is the consequence of the
Mm-hmm.
society not understanding you. So we're able to help heal that so you can embrace really navigate the neurodifference now, which is what we need to do because the barrier is like the symptoms that we can heal the symptoms. We can work through the
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. You can manage it. Like it can be lifelong for a lot of us. And depression, friend of depression, so it can come back and visit. So when you see that, you can dissect it, pull it apart, right? It's like, oh, that's not me. That's actually a consequence of society mistreating me or whatever, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, the core, get to the core. What's this thing? What's the origin? Now I see. So like we're just pulling this thing apart because sometimes when you get so dysregulated and you're not able to embrace yourself because of masking or other people's expectations, you
Mm-hmm.
lose yourself so much. And so there's all alternate ways to do this. It's like community therapy, and VTubers, virtual communities, and you don't always have to participate. If you don't feel like
Mm-hmm.
you want to, you don't have to. That's the thing too with options. You can just watch and see if you like it. And I think that's so important.
Exactly, exactly. And again, it's just sort of like a tiny change to your everyday life, but actually a huge
Mm,
relief for
yeah.
a lot of us, just to hear someone, be successful and still do the same thing. So like it gives us the idea of like not only I'm not alone, but I can find the
Yes.
success and talk about it and have this amazing community behind me as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Right on. So like last time, where can people find you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, I am here representing Psychology for Geeks. You can find us at psychologyforgeeks.com or any social media under psych, the number four, geeks. And yeah, we have a lot of in-person events that we are doing, a lot of plans for the future. We basically blend mental health and geek culture. So, to make things more digestible and easy for us to understand and more fun and entertaining, just use, video game analogies. I know you use the plant ones, and I love those. Because I don't know enough about plants, but I just love your plant analogies. And anyways, we use video games, we use movies, whatever it is people are interested to talk about how that can help our mental health and we can have fun at the same time.
Love it. Love it. I love that you encourage and advocate and really instill hope for having joy and fun because this is for sure at least the one life we have. And so I am going to actually also promote you have a Patreon.
Oh
You're
yeah.
funding your organization, important part of it. Oh my God. So I'm going to link that in the description. If anyone has some extra dollars, want to support, please give it a click and share. That would be really
Oh
helpful.
yeah, and we have these really cool things that we're planning for the Patreons, not only sort of like uh what is it? Wait, what are they called? Like presentations and stuff, like particularly for the Patreons. But we also have these really cool worksheets that I am working on
Yay.
and for the Patreon. So yeah, please check it out and become part of a community. But even if they are not in a position where you can help monetarily, there's tons of other ways you can help support us. You can subscribe to our channels, you can like, you can comment, you can share over stuff so it gets to the people that are in a position to give us money, which
Yes.
we need for the community, for the kids,
Do it
for
for
all
the
of us.
children.
Yes, do for the kids. And my gas money, please.
Yeah.
I live in a very rural area and I have to drive everywhere.
Yeah, please help. Okay. I'm gonna so thank you everyone so much. Take care. Have a great day.